Finn Family Moomintroll, written by Tove Jansson, read by Sue Swallow. Chapter 1, Part 2. When Moomintroll, Snufkin and Sniff went out onto the veranda, the others had already had their breakfast and gone off in various directions. Moominpapa was alone reading the newspaper. "Well, well, so you've woken up too," he said. "Remarkably little in the paper today. A stream burst its dam and swamped a lot of ants. All saved. The first cuckoo arrived in the valley at 4 o'clock, then flew off to the east. This is a good omen. But a cuckoo flying west is better." "Look what we found," interrupted Moomintroll proudly. "A beautiful new top hat for you." Moominpapa put aside his paper and examined the hat very thoroughly. Then he put it in front of the long mirror. It was rather too big for him. In fact, it nearly covered his eyes, and the effect was very curious. "Mother!" screamed Moomintroll. "Come and look at Father!" Moomin-Mama opened the kitchen door and looked at him with amazement. "How do I look?" said Moominpapa. "It's all right," said Moomin-Mama. Yes, you look very handsome in it, but it's just a tiny bit too big." "Is it better like this?" said Moominpapa, pushing the hat back onto the back of his head. "Well, that's smart too, but I almost think you look more dignified without a hat." Moominpapa looked at himself from the front, the side, from behind. Then he put the hat on the table and sighed. "You're right, dear," he said. "Some people just look better without hats." "Of course, dear," said Moomin-Mama kindly. "Now eat up your eggs, children. You need feeding up after living on pine needles all winter." And she disappeared into the kitchen again. "But what should we do with the hat?" said Sniff. "It's such a fine one." "We'll use it as a waste paper basket." "We'll use it as a waste paper basket," said Moominpapa. And thereupon he took it upon himself to go on writing his life story, the heavy volume about his stormy youth. Snufkin put the hat down on the floor between the table and the kitchen door. "Now you've got a new piece of furniture again," he said, grinning, for Snufkin could never quite understand why people liked to have things. He was quite happy wearing the old suit he'd had since he was born. Nobody knows where and when that happened. And the only possession he didn't give away was his mouth organ. "If you finish breakfast, we'll go and see how the Snorks are getting on," said Moomintroll. But before going out into the garden, he threw his eggshell into the waste paper basket, for he was sometimes a well-brought-up Moomin. The dining table was now empty. In the corner, between the table and the kitchen door, stood the hobgoblin's hat with the eggshell in the bottom. And then something really strange happened. The eggshell began to change its shape. This is what happens, you see. If something lies long enough in the hobgoblin's hat, it begins to change into something quite different. What that will be, you'll never know beforehand. It was lucky for Moominpapa that the hat hadn't fitted him, because the protector of all small beasts knows what would have become of him if he'd worn it a bit longer. As it was, he only got a slight headache, and that was over after dinner. Meanwhile, the eggshell had become soft and woolly, and although it stayed white, after some time it filled the hat completely. Then 5 small clouds broke away from the brim of the hat, sailed onto the veranda, thudded softly along the steps, and hung there just above the ground. The hat was empty. "Goodness gracious me," said Moomintroll. "Is the house on fire?" asked the Snork Maiden anxiously. The clouds were hanging in front of them without moving or changing shape, as if they were waiting something, and the Snork Maiden put out her paw very cautiously and patted the nearest one. "It feels like cotton wool," she said in a surprised voice. The others came nearer and felt it too. "Just like a little pillow," said Sniff. Snufkin gave one of the clouds a gentle push. It floated on a bit and then stopped again. "Whose are they?" asked Sniff. "And how did they get onto the veranda?" Moomintroll shook his head. "Well, it's the strangest thing I've ever come across. Perhaps we ought to go in and fetch Mother." "Oh, no," said the Snork Maiden. We'll try them out ourselves. And she dragged a cloud onto the ground and soothed it with her paw. So soft, said the Snork Maiden, and the next minute she was rocking up and down on the cloud with loud giggles. Can I have one? Squealed Sniff, and he jumped onto another one. Hupsy-daisy! But when he said hup, the cloud rose and made an elegant little curve over the ground. Golly! Burst out Sniff. It moved! They all threw themselves onto the clouds and shouted, Hup, hup, hupsy-daisy! The clouds bounded wildly about until the Snork discovered how he could steer them. By pressing with one foot, you could turn the cloud, and if you pressed with both feet, it went forward, and if you rocked gently, the cloud slowed up. They had terrific fun, even floating up to the treetops and to the roof of Moomin House. Moomintroll hovered outside Moomin Papa's window and shouted, Cock-a-doodle-doo! He was so excited he couldn't think of anything more intelligent. Moomin Papa dropped his memoir pen and rushed to the window. Bless my tail, he burst out. Whatever next? It'll make a good chapter for your story, said Moomintroll. He steered his cloud to the kitchen window where he shouted to Mother. But Moomin Mama was in a great hurry and went on making rissoles. What have you found now, dear? She said. Just be careful you don't fall down. But down in the garden, the Snork Maiden and Snufkin had discovered a new game. They steered at each other at full speed and collided with a soft bump. Then the first to fall off had lost. Now we'll see, said Snufkin, urging his cloud forward, but the Snork Maiden dodged cleverly to his side and then he attacked from underneath. Snufkin's cloud capsized and he fell on his head in the flower bed and his hat fell over his eyes. Third round, squeaked Sniff, who was referee and flying a bit above the others. That's 2, 1, ready, steady, go. Should we go on a little flying tour together? Moomintroll asked the Snork Maiden. Certainly, she answered, steering her cloud up beside his. Where shall we go? Let's hunt up the Hemulin and surprise him, suggested Moomintroll. They made their tour of the garden, but the Hemulin wasn't in any of his usual haunts. Well, he can't have gone far, said the Snork Maiden. Last time I saw him, he was sorting his stamps. But that was 6 months ago, said Moomintroll. Oh, so it was, she agreed. We've slept since then, haven't we? Did you sleep well, by the way? Asked Moomintroll. The Snork Maiden flew elegantly over a treetop and considered a little before answering. I had an awful dream, she said at last, about a nasty man in a high black hat who grinned at me. How funny, said Moomintroll. I had exactly the same dream. Had he got white gloves on? The Snork Maiden nodded, and slowly gliding through the forest, they pondered a while. Suddenly, they caught sight of the Hemulin. He was wandering around with his hands behind his back and his eyes on the ground. Moomintroll and the Snork Maiden made a perfect 3-point landing on either side of him and called out brightly, Good morning. Ow! Oh, said the Hemulin. Oh, how you frightened me. You shouldn't jump at me suddenly like that. Oh, sorry, said the Snork Maiden. Look what we're riding. That's most extraordinary, said the Hemulin. Oh, but I'm so used to your doing extraordinary things that nothing surprises me now. Besides, I'm feeling very melancholy. Why is that? Said the Snork Maiden sympathetically. On such a fine day, too. You wouldn't understand anyway, said the Hemulin. Well, we'll try, said Moomintroll. Have you lost a rare stamp again? On the contrary, answered the Hemulin gloomily. I have them all. Every single one. My stamp collection is complete. There's nothing missing. Oh, well, isn't that nice? Said the Snork Maiden encouragingly. I said you'd never understand me, didn't I? Moaned the Hemulin. Moomintroll looked anxiously at the Snork Maiden and they drew their clouds back a little out of consideration for the Hemulin's sorrow. He wandered on and they waited respectfully for him to unburden his soul. At last he burst out, How hopeless it all is. And after another pause he added, What's the use? You can have my stamp collection for the next paper chase. But Hemulin, said the Snork Maiden, horrified. That would be awful. I mean, your stamp collection is the finest in the world. That's just it, said the Hemulin in despair. It's finished. There isn't a stamp or an an error that I haven't collected. Not one. What shall I do now? I think I'm beginning to understand, said Moomintroll. You aren't a collector anymore. You're only an owner, and that isn't nearly so much fun. No, said the heartbroken Hemulin, not nearly. He stopped and turned his puckered-up face towards them. Dear Hemulin, said the Snort Maiden, taking him gently by the hand, I have an idea. What about your collecting something different, something new? That's an idea. Very good idea. Well, maybe, admitted the Hemulin, but he continued to look worried because he thought he oughtn't to look happy after having such a big sorrow. Butterflies, for example, suggested Moomintroll. Impossible, said the Hemulin gloomily again. One of my second cousin collects them, and I can't stand him. Film stars, then, said the Snort Maiden. The Hemulin only sniffed. Ornaments, Moomintroll said hopefully. They're never finished. But the Hemulin pooh-poohed that too. Well, I really don't know, said the Snort Maiden. Oh, we'll think of something for you, said Moomintroll consolingly. My mother's sure to know. By the way, have you seen the muskrat? He's still asleep, said the Hemulin sadly. He says it's unnecessary to get up so early, and I think he's right. And with that, he continued his lonely wanderings, while Moomintroll and the Snort Maiden steered their clouds right up over the treetops and rested there, rocking slowly in the sunshine. They considered the problem of the Hemulin's new collection. What about shells? The Snort Maiden proposed. Or rarey buttons, said Moomintroll. But the warmth made them sleepy and didn't encourage thinking, so they lay on their backs on the clouds and looked up at the spring sky where the larks were singing. And suddenly they caught sight of the first butterfly. As everyone knows, if the first butterfly you see is yellow, the summer will be a happy one. If it's white, then you will just have a quiet summer. Black and brown butterflies should never be talked about. They are much too sad. But this butterfly was golden. What can that mean? Said Moomintroll. I've never seen a golden butterfly before. Gold is even better than yellow, said the Snort Maiden. You wait and see. That's the end of chapter 1, part 2.